Hi, and welcome to the Origins Podcast. I'm your host, Lawrence Krauss. This is a special edition of the podcast because I'm reaching out to you at an important time to ask for your help to save an Afghan family, the lives of 8 people. The mother, who was a human rights lawyer in Afghanistan who helped abused women, the father, who worked for a French NGO, the son, who was studying computer science, and 5 young girls who were hoping to have a future in which they could be educated and have full lives. That family suffered tremendously. They were hoping to leave under a French airplane flight when Kabul airport was bombed, and they reached out to my colleague Claire Belinsky, a journalist, an American journalist living in Paris, and she took up their case. And their lives were in danger because after the Taliban took over and after Kabul fell, not only were the people who she'd put in jail released from jail, but the Taliban actually went through the offices of the Afghan Bar Association, getting the names of various lawyers and hunting house to house looking for them. And the family had to hide in various locations in order to survive, not just for the safety and life of the mother and father, but the young girls, of course, were in danger of being married off to Taliban fighters at a young age. It was a harrowing experience, clearly, for them. And happily, with primarily Claire's help and her readers who provided some funds to support them, they managed to escape to Pakistan, where they've been for almost the last 2 years. And following that, Claire reached out to me because there's a program, a Canadian program, that allows agencies to sponsor refugees if 5 people in a location will commit to doing so. And the agencies get a quota of slots. And Claire knew that I'd moved to Canada and also knew I had a fairly wide group of acquaintances. And also that earlier I had helped a young girl from Afghanistan who was literally trapped in her house and watched the internet and had been watching my videos about science and had learned English and learned mathematics and wanted to be a scientist. And I'm very happy to say that with the help of many others, including Nicholas Kristof at the Times and others, we managed to get her to the United States. I managed to get my university to give her a full scholarship. And she's ultimately studied and got a degree in physics and then went on to graduate school. And saving her life was, for me, one of the most, I think, satisfying and important things I feel I've ever done. And now we have the opportunity to save this family, this deserving family who want a chance to thrive and succeed. And what happened was when Claire reached out to me, we tried various agencies, had various false starts. It was heartbreaking. And eventually, we decided that where I lived here in Prince Edward Island wouldn't work, that Toronto was a greater opportunity. And there again, we went through the forms and various agencies were very sympathetic, but there's so many refugees trying to come in, they couldn't sponsor them given their number of slots they had. Finally, to our immense relief and exaltation, the Jewish International, the Jewish Immigrant Aid Society, in Toronto, listened to their story and our story and agreed to allocate 8 slots for the family with their allocation this year. Now, in addition to that, we had to get 5 people and found 5 wonderful people in that area willing to commit the time and effort to support the family when they come with housing, helping them find housing and schooling and all the rest. But the biggest commitment is by the regulations of the government, the agencies need to guarantee 1 full year of support. So, those amounts are determined by the government, by the agencies. And Toronto is not a cheap place to be. So we had to guarantee in advance, before the application could be sent to the government, to get 1 full year of support for a family of 8 in Toronto. And that's a non-trivial amount of money, as we physicists like to say. We've been in the midst of trying to do that. Claire, with her GoFundMe account, has raised a significant amount of money in the last few weeks to try and help us. But we're under the gun here. We have till September 30th now to raise the funds for a family of 8. And the Jewish Immigrant Aid Society has created a two donation sites, one of which involves tax-deductible donations, one which doesn't. And you can go to those by following the link from Critical Mass, my Substack site, our Substack site, lawrencekrauss.substack.com. And the piece is entitled "We Can Now Save This Afghan Family with Your Support." And you can find the direct links there in that article. It's free for anyone to look at. Or you can go to my X account, lkraus1, and you can link to it from there. Happily, we've begun to raise some money, and also a very generous donor has agreed to match any donation up to $50,000. And I've decided to add on to that and say, in addition to that, any donation up to additional $5,000, I will match. And with all that, if we can raise that money by the end of this month, we can then put in the application and try the next phase to get Canada to approve visas for the family. That process could take up to 2 years. And even though the family is safe right now in Pakistan, at any moment they could be deported and their lives could end, both literally and metaphorically. I'm hoping you'll help us support this family. There's a saying that someone just told me, one of the donors I spoke to yesterday, just told me in his religion, that says, saving one life is like saving the world. And this is a chance to save 8 lives. And I hope you'll consider helping us save them. And if you can't donate, I hope you'll help pass the word on. Of all of our podcasts, I hope you'll let people know about this and distribute it so that people can help us. In addition to what I'm recording right now, Claire Belinsky recorded a beautiful video, which we're appending to the end of this podcast, talking in more detail about the family, the history, their history, and the history of working with us. If you can't watch it, if you're listening to this on a podcast site, the audio is as equally compelling as the video. So I hope you'll listen to that as well. And after that, or even during that, I hope you'll consider going to the sites, our Critical Mass site, clicking the link, and donating some money for this family before the deadline is September 30th, or letting your friends know about it. Either way, I really appreciate your listening to this and considering helping us now. Thank you very much.
I'm Claire Berlinski. I'm an American journalist, and I'm in Paris. And I edit a magazine called The Cosmopolitan Globalist. I want to introduce you to a family from Afghanistan. They're a family of 8. 5 girls, 1 boy, and their parents. Some of my readers know this family already. I'm not using their real names here because their lives would be in danger. And that's also why I've blurred their faces. I'll just call them Mr. and Mrs. Anonymous and their children. Beautiful and intelligent daughters, super intelligent daughters. And they also have a hardworking, completely charming and resourceful son. Before Afghanistan fell to the Taliban, Mrs. Anonymous, who is a lawyer, was a women's rights activist and a children's rights activist, especially girl children. She also received counter-narcotics training from the U.S. State Department, and she received a diploma from them. She defended women who had been abused, who had been forced into marriage, who didn't even know they had such a thing as rights, and she put the men who abused them behind bars. Now the Taliban is in control. The men she imprisoned have all been released, and they want her dead. So does the Taliban, which since the fall of Afghanistan has been ruthless in persecuting women's rights defenders and lawyers like her. I made this video to ask for your help in helping this family reach safety in Canada. When Kabul fell, the Taliban raided her office and seized a database which contained her names and all of her identifying details, along with the details of all of her children and her husband. Her husband used to work for a French NGO. Women like her have already been murdered.
طوری که آگاهی دارین انجمن مستقل وکلای مدافع افغانستان کردن، اونا به تصفیه و غصب نهادهای دولتی و غیر دولتی اقدام کردند که از آن جمله انجمن مستقل وکلای مدافع افغانستان را به تاریخ 24 نوامبر 2021 غصب کردند داخل انجمن شدن. اعضای رهبری انجمن و کارمندای انجمن را مورد لطکوب، توهین و تحقیر قرار دادن و جبران اونا را از انجمن اخراج کردن. و همچنان دیتابیس انجمن که در انجمن توسط ما ترتیب شده بود، او دیتابیس بدبختانه در اختیار طالبا قرار گرفت و به اساس از تعداد زیادی از وکلای مدافع ما، اهم از طبقه اوناس و ذکور، اونا بعضا دستگیر شدن، توهین و تحقیر، لطکوب، شکنجه و تحت سلب آزادی قرار گرفتن. یک تعداد وکلای مدافع ما به شهادت رسید. تعداد زیاد وکلای مدافع ما فعلا در حالت بد امنیتی و اقتصادی قرار دارند که به ولایات متواری شدن و در داخل شهرها پنهان شدن، بعضا به کشورهای همسایه پناهنده شدن و بعضا هم فرار کردن.
There are 5 girls and young women in this family, and before Kabul fell, they were all in school. They had big dreams. One wanted to be a lawyer like her mother and a women's rights defender. Another one wanted to be a journalist. Their son was studying computer science at university. The girls and the boys alike, their education stopped. But worse, they feared that they would see their parents executed before their eyes. And the girls feared they would be forcibly married to Taliban fighters. So that's why I'm working with the Canadian physicist Lawrence Krauss, whose name you might know because he's a very famous theoretical physicist, but for our purposes, he's just a guy with a really big heart and a remarkable team of volunteers in Toronto to bring this family to Canada. Let me tell you the story. Their father used to work for a French NGO called Abidjan that did vaccination campaigns in the Afghan countryside, and they wrote very enthusiastic letters of commendation for him. They don't exist anymore, but the fact that he used to work for, in the Taliban's eyes, France, put the family at even greater risk. Right after Kabul fell, the French government completely agreed that this family was at risk. The French government put their names on their flight list for immediate evacuation. When the bomb went off at Abbey Gate, their son was there. He was trying to secure his family's place on the flight, and he escaped the last 5 minutes. And after the bombing, the flight stopped. And to their horror, the family realized that they had been left behind in Afghanistan. And that's how I met them. Their eldest son, who at the time spoke the best English in the family, knew that I lived in Paris because he followed me on Twitter. And he saw that I was closely following the terrible news from Afghanistan. And he also saw that I was deeply worried about all of our Afghan allies. But he didn't really understand who I was. He didn't realize I was just a journalist, and not even a French journalist, an American journalist. He mistook me for someone who might have the power to intercede with the French government. So in a case of mistaken identity, he contacted me and he begged me to ask them to send another flight to rescue them. And I'll always remember that conversation. He told me that the terrorists had taken over his city. He'd never seen them before. He wasn't old enough to remember them. And he wrote that they looked like wild animals. He and his family were so terrified. You could hear it in their voices. His mother feared she would be killed in front of her children, and the girls would be raped and forcibly married off or killed. Of course, I couldn't help because the last plane had taken off. I'm a lot less important than apparently I seemed on Twitter. I'm not a French official and I have no pull with the French government. I'm just a journalist. But I was, of course, horrified by what they were telling me and by their predicament. And it honestly reminded me of the plight of Jews who were desperately trying to escape France after it fell to the Nazis, including my grandparents. And I could hear this family's absolute terror. So, of course, I said I would see if I could do anything to help. So I began making phone calls and getting in touch via email with everyone I could think of. And if you'll remember, everyone with any connection to Afghanistan was trying to do the same thing. There were U.S. military personnel who were trying to organize rescue operations, private rescue operations, for the people they served with whose lives were now in immediate danger. And people were exchanging information on Twitter. None of us knew what to do. France had established a crisis hotline, which I called over and over and over again. And meanwhile, I'm speaking to this family, and they are hiding and waiting for the knock on the door and just absolutely terrified. It was just terrible to speak to them and to wonder if they were just going to disappear. All of my calls to French officials and to American ones too went unreturned. So I quickly realized that the French government was, like everyone, completely overwhelmed by the scale of this catastrophe. Among other problems, they had suddenly been made unemployed, and none of the women in the family even dared to leave the house. They were in hiding. They needed to eat. So I started a GoFundMe campaign to help them. I wasn't even sure how I would get money to them in Afghanistan. I wasn't sure if it was even possible, but I figured if they make it through the next few weeks, they're going to need money to get out of there. I explained the story, and my readers were as horrified as I am, and who wouldn't be, and they made an incredibly generous contribution to the GoFundMe campaign to help them. Meanwhile, I tried to figure out how to get them out of Afghanistan, where they could go, who would take them. Kabul was in complete chaos, and they hadn't been expecting this, not at all. It came as a complete shock, and they didn't have passports. So it took months, it took agonizing months before services were restored in Kabul to a degree sufficient to allow them to get passports. Meanwhile, the girls are living like prisoners. They've never experienced anything like this. They'd been in school before. They were normal teenagers, normal girls. They were studying, and now they're all living and hiding, and in fact moving from house to house because they're so scared. There was one point where they had travel documents for everyone but one daughter. So they were trying to decide whether their mom, who was most at risk, should leave with one member of the family and who should stay behind, or whether they should wait until they could all leave. It was an unbearable situation. But they determined they weren't leaving without the whole family. And when they finally got passports for everyone, my readers again helped them to escape to Pakistan, where they went overland, the whole family of 8. One day after they managed to get across the border, that border crossing was closed. Since then, they've been in Islamabad. My readers have helped them to rent an apartment and put food on the table since then. But unfortunately, they're not safe there either, because Pakistan is deporting Afghans. And so again, they're living in fear. They've been waiting for the UN to give them refugee cards that certify their status according to the Geneva Conventions, and that would allow them to make an asylum claim. But the UN's bureaucracy is also overwhelmed by the scale of the crisis. And we've learned that getting those cards can take years, by which point they might be deported back to Afghanistan, where they face death. The refugees from Afghanistan are welcome nowhere. The United States hasn't even given asylum to Afghans who risked their lives for us in battle. Europe is already groaning under the weight of a refugee crisis that's so severe that it's left much of Europe politically destabilized. So I had to figure out where this family could go to have a shot at a decent life. Pakistan was better than Afghanistan. It was a lot better, but they still weren't safe, and the girls still couldn't go back to school because Pakistan won't let refugees use their public services. The more research I did, the worse it looked. It's just nearly impossible, if you're an Afghan refugee, to legally enter another country. We've just made it impossible. But I finally discovered that Canada has a program that could actually work. It allows a community in Canada to sponsor a refugee family. You had to find a sponsorship group of at least 5 people who all lived in the city or the town where the family would be living and would agree to welcome them and help them in their first year. So that was challenge 1, finding the group. And the second challenge is the group has to have enough money to cover their expenses for a year. And you need to have all of that money in place. So this sounded hard, but it didn't sound impossible. It was the first thing that wasn't impossible. If I could figure out a way to make those 2 things happen. So I started going through my contact list, trying to figure out who I knew in Canada, who had written for us. Everyone I'd ever met in Canada, I think, got a call from me, including my friend Lawrence Krauss, the famous theoretical physicist. And he got it immediately. He understood immediately. He understood the danger they were in and why it was so important to bring them there. And he had actually worked to bring another young Afghan woman to safety, so he understood how difficult it was too. But he heard about this and he immediately said, yeah, we have to get them there. We figured there had to be a group somewhere in Canada who would consider sponsoring a family of 8. It's an unusually large number, but he started working his contact list. We worked on it and we worked on it, and we had several heartbreaking false starts. We found groups that thought they could help, but who in the end couldn't. And then we found partners in Toronto. I made new friends in Toronto, and they joined our team. During this time, and I was really moved by this, my readers, the readers of the Cosmopolitan Globalist, supported them, and the family, of course, is incredibly grateful. They will never forget the generosity. Finally, their son had a suggestion. He discovered the Jewish Immigrant Aid Society, and he sent us their telephone number and said, what about them? Maybe they could sponsor us. So we got in touch with them, and it turns out, yes, they could. They were the solution. They were the solution. They told us they would be willing to act as sponsors for the entire family. And it's really hard to describe the joy we all felt when we heard this. I was fighting back tears when they said, yes, we can confirm we have 8 places for them in 2024. So one hurdle down, and then the next one, money, which is, of course, where you come in. We need to show by September that we've raised enough money to cover the entire family's living expenses for 1 year in Toronto. And we've already secured a really significant part of it, but we haven't got all of it, and we need to raise the rest. And we just have to do it. I mean, they have come all this way. We can't let them down at this last stage. So I'm asking you for help again. And again, we are really close. We've come so far. We've already secured a very significant part of it. But we need to raise the rest. We would be grateful for any amount you can give. There's no such thing as a donation too small. There's certainly no such thing as a donation too big. So please just help them in any amount you can afford. Let's get them over the finish line. There's really something remarkable about this family. They are so resilient and they are so industrious. I'm so impressed by them. The girls didn't speak any English when Kabul fell. I only spoke to them through their son because he was the only one who spoke any English. And think about how they've been living since then. They haven't been in an English language immersion environment. They've been living and hiding in Kabul, or basically in hiding in Islamabad, no access to school. And yet they've taught themselves English just through discipline, just through hard work every day, no matter what stress they face. To the extent that one of their daughters has won a full scholarship for a distance learning university degree program at the Afghan University in Doha, a program that was set up for refugees like her. It's hugely competitive. She beat thousands of other girls, and she didn't even speak English when she began studying for it. My readers so far have, without exaggeration, literally saved their lives. How often do you have the satisfaction of saving a life or a whole family's life? And in the meanwhile, I've come to know this family. They are so motivated. They are so smart. They've been through so much. I am so certain they will thrive if they can just get a break, a place where they can be safe from the Taliban and go to school. In the West, most people don't want to think about Afghanistan. It's just too painful. But this family doesn't have that luxury. The world has really washed its hands of Afghanistan's women and girls. They have nowhere to go. This is their only hope, and we're really close to getting there. They've got support from my friends, from Lawrence's friends, from me, and from Lawrence. We just need to get them over the last hurdle. So I really hope you'll help them again, or for the first time, if this is the first time you've heard this story. You can contribute to their GoFundMe page, and the link is below. The money you contribute goes to changing their lives completely, saving their lives, literally saving their lives. And they are grateful beyond any words for your support. And so am I. So am I.